Okay, I will admit them now.
Great.
Hello, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to all of our alumni joining. My name is Greg Leparati. I'm Associate Director of Alumni Relations at Baruch College. Pleasure to have you all here this evening. Hopefully some of you were at our last event that we had with Alan Chen a week or two ago about Introduction to Financial Literacy. Today is going to be a really interesting topic. Looking forward to the presentation. As with last time, a few quick ground rules. If you'd like to turn your cameras on, you can. It's nice to see people's faces, but definitely mute your microphones. We don't want to have any ambient noise or anything like that. Throughout the presentation, put your questions in the chat bar, and Alan will get to as many as he can throughout the presentation. And at the end, we'll also pause for a dedicated Q&A. So if we don't get to your question throughout the actual presentation, there will be a chance at the end to do so. And now I'd like to just briefly introduce our presenter today, Alan Chen. As I said last time, Alan is a software engineer by day, and he is deeply interested in financial literacy and various financial aspects. He's also working on a fintech startup in his spare time. He's a very busy guy. He has no stake in these topics. He's not a financial planner. He's not trying to sell you on his services. He just is deeply interested and cares about these issues and wants to share his knowledge with you. One of the things that Alan learned is that, you know, he got this great business degree from Baruch, but he actually didn't know the basics of your finances after he graduated. And so, especially for recent graduates, this is a really important topic because, you know, we're trying to figure out what to do with our money now that you've got your first, you know, real job making serious money. And Alan's going to talk today about some of the tips to get you ready for retiring. And as crazy as that might sound for many of you who are recent grads and maybe are in your early 20s, it's never too early to start thinking about retirement. And it's something that you're going to be thinking about for decades. So that being said, I'd like to now introduce Alan to take it away. And again, put your comments in the chat and we will get to them throughout the presentation. Alan?
All right, thank you, Greg. A wonderful introduction. Welcome to the Financial Literacy Workshops. This is a three-part workshop. This is the second part of those workshops. Usually I host these workshops for students on a monthly basis. And now I'm just starting to do them for alumni. So I do run a blog on the side to moonfund.com, which is basically about personal finance and retirement. But today we'll be talking about investing for retirement, right? So this is like a deep dive into how you can achieve a comfortable retirement. All right, so more details about who I am, a little quick introduction. Just to kick us off, I am a CUNY Baruch graduate, so at one point I was in your shoes as well, and if you just graduated, I was in those shoes as well. I do come from a low-income immigrant background, and this I think is puts me in a very unique situation where my family never talked about money, right? So we didn't have a lot of money, so there wasn't a reason to talk about it because those conversations usually don't go anywhere. And if this sounds familiar to anyone, your parents, my parents are counting on me to fund their retirement, right? So that's definitely challenging because you have to fund their retirement and think about your own retirement, right? So today we're gonna be talking about your own retirement. I mean, I firmly believe that everyone should have the opportunity to retire. Unfortunately, in America, that's not always true, right? My workshops are supposed to get us closer to that area where the middle class can take responsibility for their monetary future. Because right now, it's very difficult to do so without the knowledge or the resources. All right, now quick disclaimer. All right, so I am, as Greg has mentioned, I am not being paid to do this. This is something that I volunteer on my own free time. I'm not your financial advisor. If you do need financial advice of any kind and you need investment advice, be sure to find a financial advisor or do your own comprehensive research before making your financial decisions, right? I'm just providing information and you are free to interpret that information any way that you want. Now for this workshop, feel free to interrupt because it's gonna be a very in-depth and informational workshop. So, buckle up because there's gonna be a lot of stuff coming your way. And if you have questions, I would prefer you ask it in the very moment in the chat. before moving on, just because you can get lost in the terms, you can get lost in the math. Feel free to stop, ask the question, because people, if you're lost, other people might be lost as well. All right, to kick us off, let's look at some numbers and some charts. All right, so if we invest $375 every month into a combination of our 401k and our IRA, which we will talk more about, and you do that for 42 years, right, from 25 to 67, you can potentially retire with $1.6 million. Right, that's a lot of money, and the earlier you start, the better. Right, so in the chart on the left, you can see the green represents your investments and the growth that occurred over those 42 years. And the blue represents the money that you actually put in. So this is the $375 every month for 42 years. So you can clearly see how the money that you put in grows rapidly over time, and the longer time you have, the more it grows. All right, so it's very important to start early if possible. If you're not starting early, if you're not 25, don't worry about it, because the way around it is to just save more money every month. So this assumes a 7% return on average, something that most financial professionals do use as their benchmark. All right, now if you were to retire 1.6 million by 67, can anyone take any guesses about what your yearly salary might look like before taxes? You can just respond in the chat if you have any ideas about a yearly salary. Around 50K. 46, that's 46,000. That's a very exact number. 53K, another exact number. 85K. Yeah. Pretty good numbers, pretty good estimates. Yeah, so the number that you can actually go with is $50,000, right? And this number is very important because the average graduate across all of America usually graduates making $50,000, right? Obviously, you give or take 10K depending on your major and your industry, but generally speaking, you'll be making $50,000, right? So the average college graduate has an opportunity to retire. The real question is, what tools and what resources do you need to know or need to look for and utilize to help you get there, right? And the biggest thing here is thinking about your budget, right? This is the first step to any part of your financial life, any part of your financial planning. You need to think about the money that's coming in and leaving your hands, right? And the best way to think about it is think about it in terms of monthly expenses. So this is the money that you spend every month. So this could be, you're eating out. Well, I guess you're not eating out anymore. So takeout, right? If you have takeout, or if you're buying furniture and anything like that, it's a monthly expense. Right? On the other hand, monthly income is the paycheck, the money that's going into your bank account. Right? So the idea being is if you have a budget, you can figure out how much money you have left over at the end of the month. Right? A lot of people don't put the effort in to come up with a budget, and that can really harm you because at that point, you don't know how much money you have in excess every month, or if you even have money in excess at the end of every month. And this is tough because it means, how do you know if you can save money, right? If you don't have money left over, you can't save money. So if your expenses exceed your income, you need to start thinking about how you can cut back either in your expenses or you make more money, right? There's no other way around it. Those are the two levers that you can pull. And the idea is that you need to have money to save money. When I say save, I mean, saving for a house, saving for retirement, saving for a car. Really, any financial goal, the first step is figuring out your budget and where it stands. And all you gotta do is just record your expenses for a month, right? Maybe 2 months if you want to be exact. And that'll help you give you an idea about where you stand on everything. Fixed versus variable expenses. Variable. Yes. So for those of you who attended my first workshop, for Introduction to Financial Literacy. Yeah, so there's two types of expenses. There's fixed and variable expenses. Basically, fixed is rent or insurance, anything that doesn't change from month to month, and variable tends to fluctuate. So most people try to change their variable expenses first, because if they fluctuate every month, there's an implication that, or it's implied that you can sort of reduce it. Right, so try to reduce both, in my opinion, if you can, right? Tackle the variable and then go for the fixed if you can. It's interesting because some people are trying to negotiate lower rent now in the pandemic, so give that a shot, never hurts. It does help your budget in the long run. Now, the tools that I use for budgeting are the tools that my friends and I use. There's always Excel. Excel is an easy thing to use. It's free for most CUNY students, so you did happen to get it when you were a CUNY student, you can use Excel. There's also Google Sheets, the tool that I use. And this one is for free for sure. You just have to set up your own spreadsheet, and I just record all the things that I spend, right? And I categorize it myself and put some fancy bar charts here and there and pie charts. And then if you feel like, manual recording of all your expenses are too much work, and manual recording of your incomes is too much work, consider using automated tools. And those automated tools include Mint and You Need a Budget. All right, so most of you have probably heard of Mint. Mint is basically a free tool to help you automate all your expenses, as long as you connect your financial accounts. All right, so at the end of every month, it can tell you how much money you spent eating takeout, or how much money you spent on rent, or how much money you spent going to spending money on electronics, right? So Mint is free. The trade-off is that there are ads, right? So it's implied that they do sell your financial information. So if you care about that, that's something to be aware of. You Need a Budget is sort of the paid version of Mint. You do have to pay for it, but there are no ads, right? So that's the trade-off. But all of these are generally great tools. It doesn't matter which one you use. Everyone does their budget differently. What matters is that you have a budget, and you start keep track of how much money you spend and how much money you make. All right, so just to give a quick example of what a monthly budget looks like when we break it down by amount and category. These numbers were pulled from both personal experience and research based on some averages on a $50,000 salary in New York City, right? So if you're working in New York City, to sort of achieve this, you have to live ideally in the outer boroughs, right? So for example, here you're living in Brooklyn with 2 roommates, right? We have to be realistic here in terms of, like, if you're making $50,000, it's going to be tough to survive in New York City. So you're going to have to do some trade-offs here, especially if you have long-term financial goals, at least until you start making more money, right? So some stuff here. Obviously, MTA is not really a concern anymore. That price is no longer accurate because no one commutes anymore for the most part. Everyone's working from home. Otherwise, you have rent, 1.2K for 2 roommates. Takes up about 50% of your expenses. Quite hefty, but realistic. Regardless, eating out, not a thing anymore really. But this budget is one example of averages, right? Don't worry if your budget does not align to this. The point is to give you an example, right? And I even put a miscellaneous of $500 just on the side for who knows. People have different interests, they have different hobbies, and you want to spend money. Eating out probably just means Uber Eats now. Yes, that's a good way to put it, right? Takeout, big thing. Student loans. Student loans will eat up a lot, so maybe your miscellaneous is your student loans, unfortunately. All right, so your budget will vary. Loans can be a big part of your budget, depending on how it's structured and how you're paying for them. So this, if you total this all up, it roughly comes out to $2,445 each month, right? That's a pretty big number. That's a pretty big number coming out from your bank account every month. So let's run some quick math. All right, so if you're making $50,000, and you are in New York City, roughly your post-tax income will be $3,000, or $3,094. And you can run it in any online calculator, or just wait until you get your paycheck. to give you a rough estimate about what this number might be. Now, if your monthly expenses is $2,445, that leaves you with $649 to save every month, right? Because and the $4,445, it does include the miscellaneous cost, right? So you have some miscellaneous costs, it's accounted for there. Now, remember the number that we spoke about before? $375 is how much you need to save every month. So $649, you still have some leeway, right? You still have some flexibility in terms of like money left over to save. So everyone's budget's gonna look different. Don't worry about that. What matters is that you can arrive at this number. Right? So you wanna do this math, you wanna get to this number for every month and figure out how much can you afford to save. And that'll really help you sort of future project, figure out how much money you're saving, how much you can invest. And then from there, you can figure out, what can I buy a house? When can I retire? How much will I have when I retire, right? All these opportunities open up once you start with this first step. Now, are there any other questions? I'm gonna pause throughout to give time for questions, but if there are none, I'm gonna move on. But I will take this opportunity to drink water and sort of like breathe.
Got to stay hydrated, Alan. I hear you.
Gotta stay hydrated.
Yeah. It rained pretty bad earlier. I don't know if you guys noticed that. It was crazy for about 20 minutes. Oh, man.
It was. At least it wasn't a storm that knocked out power, so I'm happy for that.
Yeah.
All right. Hopping on to the next big topic is emergency fund, right? So this is very important for retirement because one of the things that people who save for retirement end up doing is they end up doing stuff like borrowing against their 401k or withdrawing money from their 401k or their retirement accounts, right? If you take money out of your retirement account, you're basically stealing from yourself for the future, right? People do it for a lot of reasons, but the biggest ones is going to be an emergency, right? An emergency could be anything ranging from a medical emergency, if you lost your job loss, or home repairs. But it's any unexpected expense that might cost you from a few $100s to a few $1,000s, right? So it's hard to predict, but you want to have some sort of safety net, essentially. And the rule of thumb that we try to follow is try to have 3 to 6 months of living expenses. So once you figure out helping family, really great reason, yeah. If you want to help your family, you definitely want to have an emergency fund for that. So this is the idea that once you have your budget, you can figure out how much money you're spending every month. If you save, 3 months worth of living expenses, you should be safe, right? You want to be more conservative. Save 6 months. I've seen people save a year or even 2 years, just because they want to feel safe, right? Because if you lose your job, you want to have some time. You want to rush into your next job to sort of save, to sort of like find a better job, not save. So this is a good rule of thumb. I strongly encourage people to use online high yield savings account. So if you went to my first workshop, I encourage this a lot then too, still encouraging it, because an online high yield savings account will give you better interest. Where should your emergency fund be? The way I put it is, I would put in a savings account, right? Preferably high yields, right? So I'm a big fan of not investing this money, right? So if your emergency fund is in a high yield savings account, aren't there issues with using it? I would say no, it's not any different from a savings account, right? So a savings account, you have 6 withdrawals per month, right? So chances are you're not gonna have 6 emergencies in a single month. If you do, then you can still withdraw, but there might be a fee you have to pay. But that's gonna be a problem whether you have a normal savings account or a high yield savings account. Is there a limit to the amount you withdraw? The limit is going to be depending on where you open up an account, right? So some high yield savings accounts have no minimum. So try to open accounts that have no minimum. That way you can withdraw as much as you want, maybe until you reach $0. What would be considered high yield? I'm glad you asked that question. High yields right now would be 0.95%. When I first did this workshop, it was 2%, right? So times have changed, but it's still 95 times better than a normal savings account, right? So that's what's considered high yield for me. That's a good question, right? So some people thought you might have to keep money in the high yield savings account for a period of time. That's something called a certificate deposit. That might be what you're describing, right? Certificate deposit is different. They actually have a higher yield than a high yield savings account because they require you to leave money with the bank. Right? You can't withdraw it without paying a penalty. So there's things that are higher than high yield savings accounts, and certificate deposit is one of those examples. Thoughts on an online account versus a brick and mortar? Yeah. This is a heavy debate. I would say there's not much of a difference per se. The only difference is if you need cash right away, but then I would encourage you to have just a checking account with a normal physical bank, right? And to have a high yield savings account where you store most of your emergency fund, which will likely have more cash in your checking account, right? The only difference is that there might be a delay in when you can get the money, maybe like 2 to 3 days to a week, right? But if you have a delay and you need money right away, even if you have debt, if you lose your job, you should have enough money in your checking account to sort of buffer that period. But other than that, there's not many trade-offs really. Usually the customer service of these online high yield savings account are great. They try to solve the problem as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. If the interest is higher in high yields, why would we want a normal savings account? You don't want a normal savings account. The reason you don't open up a high yield savings account is because no one's told you should open up a high yield savings account. No bank is going to say, hey, don't bank with us. Don't open a savings account and open up a high yields, because then they lose business, right? So you should definitely open up a high yield savings account. I see no reason to have a normal savings account for the most part. What percentage of your income do you contribute to your savings each month? Roughly 50%, I would say. Post-tax, pre-tax, some number in there. It's somewhere around there. That's how much I put in every month. Obviously, you don't have to put in that amount either. $375 is nowhere near that amount each month. So, it really depends on what your financial goals are and how much money you make, right? My emergency fund is at a bank that's 30 minutes bus ride away from me. A real emergency will take me to that bank. 30 minutes away. Wow, that's quite far. Maybe they're really high yields. If you have an online account, what I would suggest is just setting up a checking account near a local bank and connecting the online with the local bank and just transferring money between the two. That way you don't have to take a 30-minute bus ride. That's really far for an emergency. But if you do have an emergency, you're probably going to have time to pay off whatever that emergency is for the most part. Are credit unions any better? It depends on which credit union and where you are, right? So I've done some research into credit unions. Some do offer higher yields and sometimes better yields. But the trade-off again is, in most credit unions, their online presence is non-existent. So you might be dealing with something you have to be physical. You have to be, close to the credit union at all times. Then you got to ask the questions: is the trade-off worth it? Right? But credit unions generally have, a great deal. If you live near one, that's even better, right? So just something to keep in mind. Some people tend to be more comfortable in keeping their savings account with the same bank as they use for their checking account. Yeah, some people do feel comfortable just because the transferring money between the two is like no time at all, right? It's like 10 seconds. You just transfer the money online and you have the money in your checking account right away. So there is, the delay is what you would have to, the trade-off you would have to go for. But otherwise, I don't see a reason to not switch to a high yields. How much should you put in a high yield savings account versus a retirement account each month? So a high yield savings account, I would say it depends on your financial goals, right? The high yield savings account for me is really an emergency fund, right? So I only keep 3 to 6 months of living expenses in there, or whatever my emergency fund is. Right? It could be a year, 2 years, whatever makes sense for you. And everything else, I either toss into an investment account or into a retirement account, right? But it really depends. If you're thinking about buying a house soon, maybe you want to put money into the high yield savings account versus into a retirement account, right? Because retirement accounts, that money is locked away and kept for retirement, right? The goal is to keep it in there and not to withdraw that money. All right, that was a lot of questions, and I hope that keep them coming if there's more. But for now, I'll jump back to the slides. Oh, thoughts on money market mutual funds. So for those of you who aren't aware of money market mutual funds, most of the time when you start up an investment account, when you put money into the investment account and you don't invest in anything, that money is usually left in a money market mutual fund. I would say it doesn't. It doesn't. The way I would see it is, you want to invest your money rather than keeping it in a money market mutual fund. But I have seen people who keep their emergency fund in sort of like a pseudo investment sort of like account. But it really depends on what the yield is for the money market mutual fund. Like if it's higher than the high yields, then you want to shift your resources around. But most of the time, I don't usually use the money market mutual fund. But it does give you money if you leave it in there. Not a lot, but it's something. All right. So in terms of like a high yield savings account, the two that I'm familiar with and that my friends use, as well as Discover Savings Account and Marcus by Goldman Sachs. There's other two. There's Ally and a few others that are very trustworthy and tend to have a good record with customer service. But other than that, a quick Google search and 15 minutes on the computer will help you open up a high yield savings account, and it should be straightforward to transfer that money from your current checking account or savings account to those high yield savings accounts. Are you familiar with the T-Mobile account? I've heard about the T-Mobile account, and it's relatively new in terms when you compare it to other savings accounts, and I've heard they have a great yield. All right, so do your research. I haven't switched over to the T-Mobile account, and my main reason for not switching is that I already have a Discover savings account, so I favor minimizing the number of logins that I have over the interest rate. So the interest rate would have to be significantly higher to convince me to switch, right? Because if you're trying to chase interest rates when it comes to high yields, they do fluctuate a lot, right? So it may not be in your best interest to spend all of your time transferring money between accounts every single month, because they do change, they do compete with each other, and the U.S. Government does dictate it to a certain extent. Yeah, I mean, T-Mobile high yield savings account, you can definitely look into that. I'm not sure what their limitations are or restrictions, but I do know that it was very popular account at some point because they had a very high yield. All right, I'm gonna move over to the retirement portion of this now, and it's a lot. It's a lot because there's a lot of information out there, and I'm only gonna provide a very high level description of them. But feel free to dig in at any point if you feel the need to. So there are two major accounts when it comes to investing for retirement. The first one we're going to talk about is the 401k. And these accounts are really designed by the government to help you save for retirement. Right, so there's a bunch of tax benefits associated with them, which really increase the money that you make over time. Now the 401k, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the 401k, either through work or just people who are working mentioning it, right? And the high yields, let me just expand my slides here a little bit. All right, so the high yields for your 401k, there's traditional and Roth are the two types of accounts. And the main difference between the two is when you get taxed. All right, so traditional, you get taxed at a later time when you withdraw the money. So the money you put in is tax-free. And Roth is when you get taxed at that very moment. So that's the two difference. And then when you withdraw it, you don't get taxed. So somebody asked the question, is a 401k worth it if there's no employer matching? Let me answer that question after I get down to employer matching, just so people understand what that means. But yeah, so for your 401k, there are withdrawal penalties, right? Since these accounts are designed to help you retire. If you try to withdraw money from these accounts, the government will penalize you for doing so. So it's roughly 10% of whatever you withdraw. 10% is a lot of money, and I strongly encourage you to not withdraw money, because 10% is a lot of money that you lose just because you didn't save enough money for your emergency or financial goal, right? So that's why it's so important to have an emergency fund. Now, someone mentioned, employer matching. So this is the idea that 401ks are famous for basically free money, right? Usually your employer will provide a benefit where they say, hey, if you contribute, $400, we will match that amount and we'll give you $400 on top of that. So at the end of the month, you have $800, right? So this is essentially free money. So for the most part, if anything, the minimum you should do is contribute to your 401k for that free money, right? Now, is the 401k worth it if there is no employer match? I would say yes, because you still get the tax benefit, right? So this is going to be better no matter how you cut it when you compare it to a normal investment account, especially if you're trying to save for retirement. So if there's no employer matching, I still think it's worth it because you're still saving money. I started with a regular 401k, but it sounds like Roth is better, or does it depend? There is no better here. There is only what do you expect taxes to be like for your income bracket when you retire, right? The general idea is if you retire and at that moment when you retire, you expect to be making less money when you withdraw from your 401k, right? Then you want to use a traditional because you're delaying taxes until you have less money and you're in a lower tax bracket. If you go with Roth, what you're saying is I'm going to be making more money when I retire, right? Because you're paying taxes now versus later when you have a higher income tax bracket. All right, so you might be asking, why am I making more money when I'm retired? Well, some people generate a lot of passive income, so that does impact you. But the way that I see it, I try to diversify because I don't know what taxes are going to be like in the future. If you have a 403B for an organization that I no longer work for, can I still make contributions? All right, so for those of you who aren't aware, a 403B is very similar to a 401k, except it's for nonprofits, right? So that's the biggest difference. Usually there's, the benefits is usually it's more affordable for the employer. So usually you have lower fees associated with it, but it's not always true across the board. But the question is, can I still make contributions? Generally, no, right? If you're no longer with the employer, whether it's a 401k, 403b, you can't make contributions anymore. Generally, at that point, you want to either keep it with the employer or roll it over to an IRA, depending on your financial situation and what investments you have in the 403b. But yeah, generally speaking, the benefit you can only contribute when you're part of an organization. But if you are an entrepreneur and you have your own business, you can set up your own 401k or 403b. Right, so you still make contributions in that sense, but you have to be under some sort of organization to do so. Another key points here is the maximum you can put into a 401k every year is $19,500. A lot of money. You don't need to put that much money in there. If you do put that much money in there, you can retire. You can retire basically a multi-millionaire. Probably I think like $10 million. But you don't need $10 million to retire, right? You have other financial goals in your life, depending on how much money you make. So $19,500, a lot of money. You don't need to put that much in. Keep in mind. And the age that you can withdraw from a 401k without penalties is 59.5, right? So if you put money in here, it's in there for the long term, right? So don't think about withdrawing it. If you put it in there, you really have to commit for the long term. Otherwise, you pay a penalty of 10%. What should you be doing with your 401k when you switch jobs? So as I mentioned before, it really depends. But just to give you like a scenario, it's like factors to think about when it comes to it is you can do two things, right? You can either leave your 401k there and keep track of it throughout the years as you switch jobs. But this does mean you have multiple 401ks, so it might be difficult to keep track of. Or you can roll over a 401k to an IRA, which is an account that you will manage yourself in terms of like investments, in terms of all these things. You can manage it yourself. And then you can sort of like have one account to manage everything. So it really depends on your preference. Some people leave it with their employer because their employer has really good investment options, right? So fees are low, and they have investment options that you can't get yourself. Right? In that case, maybe it's a good reason to leave with your leave it with your previous employer. Otherwise, the third option is you can roll your 401k over to your new employer's 401k. So there's also that option. And it really depends. Like the question you have to answer is your previous employer's 401k really that good? And the chances are, it may not be, but the answer it could be yes. If so, leave it with them. If not, roll it over either to your own account or to your new employer. Is there a certain amount of money we should have saved in retirement based on age? No, right? Fidelity, all these like investment firms, brokerages, all these financial literacy articles, they always try to like guess a number about how much money you should have saved, right? Like 50 times your salary or 10 times your salary by 30, right? Some arbitrary number like that. I think it's honestly not accurate at all, because you're gonna live in different places when you retire, right? Or you're gonna move when you retire, either to a lower income place or a higher income place, high cost of living or lower cost of living, or you choose to retire when you're 40 rather than 50, right? Everyone's situation is different, and in terms of like how much you need saved for retirement, you have to figure that amount based on your situation, right? So, do you expect medical costs in the future, right? Do you expect to buy a home? Do you expect to maintain a home, right? So there's no ballpark number because every number that people give you I think it's like honestly a cop-out answer, right? They don't want to tell people to do the math and figure it out for themselves. So they try to ballpark a number that's not accurate, right? It's either too high or too low, depending on who you are, right? So you should figure out how much you need saved for retirement by yourself. And the number is usually, we can talk more about how to calculate that number in a bit, but generally you figure out what you need in retirement, right? What kind of life do you envision for yourself in retirement? Do you expect to travel a lot? Do you expect to move a lot? Do you plan to relocate to a different country? So on. You have to figure out how much everything costs. And you can usually just Google those numbers. So it's just doing the math and putting in effort to figure out that number. Can you further describe how to set up your own 401k? I have my own business and trying to figure out how to best manage my retirement funds. Yeah, I can further describe it, but I would say your best choice is go to a brokerage firm, either Vanguard, Fidelity, or Charles Schwab, or pick your own, right? Do your research. And if you look up individual 401k or just like entrepreneur 401k, you'll find some information about how to set it up. And the biggest thing you have to look out for is fees, right? Since you're setting up a 401k just for yourself, the per person fee is probably going to be higher than if a large business set up their 401k. So you have to pay to have 401k set up because you're asking a brokerage firm to manage that money for you, right? For them to report to the IRS, for them to do all these things, right? So you want to look out for that. And then you want to look out for what investment options do they have available for your 401k, right? So if you like the investment options and you like the fee that you have to pay for it, then you want to go ahead with setting one up. But I believe most of it can be done online for the most part. So just go to one of those firms and do some research into fees and into how much what funds you can invest into or what your investment options are. But it's not free. I can tell you that. All right, let's do some math for the people who either have 401k and don't know what they're doing with it, or people who are thinking about putting money into the 401k. So when you read your offer letter, usually they'll tell you about your 401k, some high level information about it. If they don't, ask for it because it does factor into your total compensation plan. So if you're making $50,000 every year, your 401k match can sound something like this, right? We'll match 100% of your first 3%, right? And really that translates to $1,500, right? The yearly contribution to match is $1,500, which is just 3% of $50,000. And the terminology may vary. If you find that terminology is confusing, I'm happy to read it over with you and figure out what that match really is like. Or you can just email your benefits department and they'll usually try to break it down for you. Now, if we divide that number by 12, you get $125, right? So if you put in $125 every month, your company is going to give you $125, right? Remember that 375? This is part of it, right? You're like almost there. So by the end of the year, if you put money into your 401k for 12 months straight, and you put in the minimum to get a match, you can end up with $3,000. Half of that is going to be your money. Half of that is going to be the company's money. And this is assuming the stock market doesn't grow, right? So it's just money in your 401k that you put in and your company put in. Simple math, pretty straightforward breakdown, but this is what it usually will look like. When you read your paycheck, you should see similar numbers, more or less. All right, well, the second type of popular retirement account, what makes an employee eligible for a 401k? Full-time hours worked. You're eligible for a 401k if your employer allows for it, is a good way to put it, right? Most of the time, full-time employees have a 401k and part-time employees don't. So it comes down to benefits and what your employer will offer as a benefit package, right? So if you're not sure if you're eligible for a 401k, ask your employer, right? Email the benefits department or email human resources, and they should have an answer to figure out if you're eligible or not. Yeah, I mean, other things for eligibility is going to be like 18, all these like other rules from the IRS. But the best place to check and the place you probably only care about is your employer, right? Otherwise, even if you're eligible under the IRS rules, if you don't have an employer to sponsor that 401k or to help you put money into that 401k, it's kind of a moot point, right? So reach out to your employer and they'll have an answer. So if you don't have a 401k, that's fine too. Or if your employer doesn't offer a 401k, that's fine too. The other option is to have an IRA, which is an individual retirement account. And it's very similar, right? It's basically designed to encourage you to save for retirement again. Similar, it's like another thing that the government came up with. It's very similar in terms of, you have two types, traditional and Roth. Same ideas. Main difference is one, you are taxed. There are withdrawal penalties for the traditional account, but when it comes to the Roth, it depends, right? It depends on a bunch of factors, and there are certain specific rules for it, but it's not clear cut. You need to read the IRS rules regarding this. And an IRA, the IRA is the individual retirement account. So just like how it sounds, you have to set it up yourself, right? Your employer generally will not set up the IRA for you. Some do, but most of the time they don't. Hence the individual portion of it. And you can put it up to $6,000, so much less than the $19,500 every year. And these numbers do change, right? They do get adjusted every year for inflation, for economic factors. And same age, 59.5 is when you can withdraw without penalties. Right, so you can set this up really quickly. It's just Googling IRA and a brokerage firm, right? And it'll take like 20 minutes to sign up for one. And I strongly encourage you to do so. You can add both a 401k and an IRA. That's my current setup. Yes, I have a 401k for my employer and a Roth IRA. And the reasoning for that breakdown is I want to diversify my tax risk. Right, I have no idea if tax is going to be higher or lower in the future. Like regardless of your income bracket, right? Taxes change all the time. It's a constant wrestle between our political parties. So for me, I have a traditional 401k and a Roth IRA. Right, that's my breakdown. And I try to have both just because it makes sense, right? You don't have to max out both of those accounts. Remember, you only need to put in $375 into these two accounts, between these two accounts, right? To have 1.6 million for retirement. So the limits are doubled. What do you mean by doubled? So every year you can put $6,000 into an IRA, and every year you can put $19,500 into a 401k. Right? In the following year, you can put in $6,000 again and $19,500 again. Right? If you're married, then I guess it's doubled, right? Then you can put in $12,000, and your spouse can also put money into their 401k. So, do you shop around for an IRA? Does the broker matter? Are all IRAs the same? All IRAs are roughly the same. The only thing you would shop around for when it comes to an IRA is you get to pick your own investments in an IRA. So some brokerages may offer specific investments that you want, the others don't. So really it's up to you to figure out where you stand on that. But most of the time they're relatively the same. They all have free trading now for the most part. Everyone mimicked Robinhood, for those of you who are aware. So generally the same, what I do shop around for is the experience on site, right? Do they have a mobile app? How good is their customer service? I shop around for these things. Otherwise, the technical portion of it in terms of investing is relatively the same, right? Because it's a standard set by the government, right? The government dictates the rules, and these firms have to apply these rules, basically, right? Can you max both a 401k and an IRA? Yes. If you do max both of them, you would be saving $25,500 each year away from retirement. So you can max them both, and if you have the financial capabilities to do so, and you don't have a financial goal, and you have enough money for your other financial goals, go for it. Do you invest all the money you put into an IRA? Yes. I try not to leave money hanging around in my IRA, because unless you have some sort of investment strategy going on, but otherwise I try to invest everything. Just because I believe the earlier that I put my money in the market, the better it is in the long term. Right? And someone mentioned Acorns IRA. Okay, I'm guessing you're asking if Acorns IRA is a good idea. Acorns, for those of you who aren't aware, if I'm correct and you're referencing the same thing I'm referencing, is the robo-advisor. So Acorns is basically an investment firm that helps you invest your money, and they try to automate it for you, right? I'm not a big fan of Acorns because I did some research into their returns, right? How much money they've made for their users. And there's not a lot of information on it. And when you can't find information on returns for a firm or an investment vehicle, either that means that it doesn't exist, or they don't want to tell you because it's lower than the standard, the average, right? So I'm not a big fan of them. They do count and prey on people who don't know how to invest, right? So there's the idea, investing is better than not investing at all. I disagree. If you invest and you lose all your money, you've effectively done yourself a disservice. You need to be investing in an educated manner, right? Acorns, they try to, take away the knowledge and the need to learn how to invest, which I don't think is a great idea. What's a beginning way to decide what to invest in? What are something to look for? Hang on tight. I'm gonna be talking about that in a bit, right after a few more slides. But we will be talking about what I invest in and my approach to this whole confusing industry. All right, so these are the 3 firms that I have experience with. And again, I don't make money off of these slides, so I'm not sponsored by any one of them. Just firms that I've used and have found to be relatively straightforward, helpful, and efficient, right? If I had to rank one of the best mobile app, I would say Charles Schwab has a great app experience. The other 2, not so much, but their desktop is passable, right? You'll get the job done at the end of the day, right? So these 3 are the big firms. You can trust these 3 because they're well-known in the industry. They have a lot of money when something goes wrong, and generally speaking, customer service does the job. All right, when do you pay taxes? So this is like a quick breakdown. When I show you slides later, feel free to reference this in terms of like when you pay taxes. 401k, IRA, same idea. Roth, you pay taxes now. Traditional, you pay them later. Right, so that's like, I know it's hard to visualize that, so I went ahead and created a chart for us when it comes to your paycheck, right? How that might look like for your paycheck. So just to break it down, let's say your paycheck is $1,000. Generally, I'm sure most of you have higher paychecks, but easy number to work with, right? So let's say you put in 10% that you want to save for retirement. And if you do traditional, you will put in 10% pre-tax, right? So $1,000 minus $100. You have $900 left over, and this $900 is then taxed at whatever rate, right? For simplicity, I put 30%. So that's $270, and then you subtract that, and then after tax income, the money that goes into your bank account is $630, right? On the other hand, for the Roth, what happens is that you have $1,000, and then that entire $1,000 is taxed first, so that'll be $300, and then that post-tax income, after-tax income, the money is taken from that amount into your Roth, right? So the money that goes into your bank account is $600, right? So these are the 2 differences in approach, right? You'll see in the Roth, obviously you'll be taking home less money because you're not reducing your taxable income, right? But the payoff is that when you retire, all the money that you made in your Roth account is not taxable, right? So what you see is what you get when it comes to the Roth account, which is always like a nice thing to have, right? Now, same idea of the charts. There's a withdrawal penalty of 59 before 59.5. There's a withdrawal penalty in every case except for a Roth IRA, right? There are obviously exceptions across the board, especially now the pandemic. Recently, there was an exception where you can take out 100K from your 401k without penalties, right? I strongly discourage any withdrawals from your 401k or your IRA unless you're retiring, right? If you're not retiring, don't withdraw money from these accounts, right? Because you will pay a penalty, and the penalty is not pretty, right? So for all intents and purposes, this is a high-level view. If you want to get into the details, check out the IRS website. They will tell you when the withdrawal penalty applies and when it doesn't. But for the most part, don't do it, right? Save the money for retirement. Don't steal from your future self. All right, any questions here? Is the backdoor Roth IRA worth opening if you're in the high income bracket? Yes, it is worth opening, but I don't want to assume everyone's in the high income bracket, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on the backdoor Roth IRA. But generally speaking, the Roth IRA has an income limit. So if you don't, the IRA will specify new income limits every year. But I think for a single person, if you don't make more than $130,000 or $120,000, they'll start phasing you out of the Roth IRA. So instead of being able to contribute $6,000, you'll be able to contribute $5,000, $4,000, so on, right? You decrease as your salary goes up until you hit zero, right? And that number the number it starts phasing out is calculated as your MAGI, right? Your MAGI income, right? It's a lot of tax terms. So if the best way to think about it, if you're not making like $120,000, you can put money into your Roth IRA without concerns. If you're making more than that, feel free to email me after, and we can talk more about what it means to have a backdoor Roth IRA. But short way to put it is it's a legal way to contribute money into a Roth IRA once you've passed the income limit. And the reason there's an income limit is so high tax individuals can't keep avoiding taxes in the future, right? So if you're making a lot of money, we can talk more about it. But otherwise, if you're not making $120,000, don't worry about it. You can put money into a Roth IRA. Otherwise, there is an income limit. But this is part of doing your own research, right? Making sure that you can contribute to these accounts before you start putting them in. To go back to the tax example chart you had, with the money you take home for a traditional account, would it be taxable? The money you take home. So at this point, at the $630 point, it's already taxed, right? Let's say the 30% tax rate includes all your taxes, right? State, federal, income, any special taxes, Social Security, it's all there. It's just 30% is just an easy number to work with. Chances are your tax is not going to be 30%. But this is the money that goes into your bank account, the $630. It's a good way to think about it. All right, I'm going to jump into the investing portion of this. And investing is very complicated activity if we want it to be complicated, right? The whole finance industry, they basically make money off of producing complicated investment tools. Whether it really makes money or not is debatable, right? But investing is one of the best ways to accumulate wealth, right? And when I say investing here, I mean stock market, real estate, you name it, right? These things, it's ways to accumulate wealth. Investing in your business is another example. But to invest is to expect exponential growth in the money that you put in, right? And a 401k and IRA requires you to make a decision to invest, like pick the investment vehicles you want to go with, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, so on, right? We'll go through a few of those. Some people think, if I put money into a 401k and IRA, the money is just going to grow by itself, right? That's not true. You need to go into those accounts, you need to log in and pick your investments. Otherwise, it's no different than putting money into a savings account, right? It just loses money to inflation. And it's also one of the best tools to guard against inflation, right? Inflation is the idea that $5 today is going to be worth less tomorrow or when you retire. All of you have seen this in real time. When I was a child, I could buy a bag of potato chips for 25 cents. No longer true due to inflation, right? So you need to make more money over time. What about age-based funds? Yes. So there are, just to explain to everyone, there are mutual funds which are designed specifically for retirement, right? So it'll be like, we have a mutual fund and then there'll be a year at the end of it. It'll be like 2050 or something like that, right? And these funds are basically funds designed to help you invest based on how far away you are from retirement. And the concept being, if you're really far away from retirement, you can afford risky investments that fluctuate a lot. If you're closer to retirement, right? So basically, the closer you get to year 2050, the more your retirements will be safer, right? A lower risk, so bonds and cash, right? So I think age-based mutual funds are a good approach, right? I personally don't use those, but you can, and it's fine, right? It gets the job done at the end of the day. All right, so those of you who aren't aware of investing, basically it boils down to this one chart here, right? Everyone talks about, hey, all these fancy charts, the alpha, the beta, doesn't matter. You only care about this one chart because this is what is sort of the source of truth for everything when it comes to investments, right? Higher return is higher risk. Higher risk, it means numbers fluctuate more, right? It'll go up and down at a wider breadth and quicker. Lower risk is usually lower return, right? So that also means it doesn't fluctuate a lot. It just kind of stays steady for the most part. No one's gonna tell you I have a high risk or a low risk, high return. That's called a pyramid scheme. It's called a scam. Don't believe someone that says that, because it fundamentally does not make sense for the most part. Right? So make sure you don't fall for that trap. Conventional investing requires you to follow this diagram. You cannot deviate from this diagram. It doesn't. Most things do not deviate from this diagram. Chances are you're just losing money at that point. All right, so we're going to start off with a high risk, high return investment tool, which is individual stocks. Now, a lot of you have heard about individual stocks, but basically, individual stock, you can just purchase it off of a stock market. And basically, when you buy one, it means you own a share of the company. You own a part of the company, right? So if you buy a piece of Apple, you own a piece of Apple, right? You buy a share of Apple, you own a piece of Apple. And if you own a large enough part of Apple, you can make decisions. You can vote, or you can have greater weight on those votes and sort of influence the direction of these public companies, right? So individual stocks are high risk, high return, right? So, it's very difficult to pick the right stock and make money, right? And if you pick the wrong stock, you lose a lot of money. If you pick the right stock, you make a lot of money, right? Basic definition of high risk, high return. And I would say, it's difficult. If it wasn't hard to pick the right stock, we would all be wealthy, right? We could just pick, hey, I think Disney is gonna do great, right? Just pick a stock, and maybe it will for the first few years. But we're talking about retirement, right? Can you guarantee it will do well for 40 plus years? Right, hard to say, right? Yes, Disney did make some money. Disney Plus is doing very well, even though its parks are struggling. But aside from that, I think it's very hard to predict. Well, I know it's very hard to predict stock prices, and we shouldn't need to, right? I would say you should avoid choosing individual stocks when it comes to retirement, because you don't know if it's going to do well when you do retire. Right? At what point do we transfer stocks to a more stable investment? Does it depend on age? I would say if you're trying to save for retirement, it should be stable investments. Right? Like, you shouldn't be picking individual stocks. Like, you shouldn't be picking a single stock and say, hey, this is for retirement right here. Because you only get one shot at saving for retirement, right? You can't go back in time when you're 60 and be like, I made the wrong move. Better pick a different stock, right? You don't have the opportunity, right? So you should be choosing stable investments from the get-go when it comes to retirement. Obviously, your other financial goals, I can't advise on that. If you think, you get rich quick scheme, separate from your retirement, that's fine, right? Do whatever you want when it comes to other financial goals. But for retirement, one shot, do your best, and don't make a mistake there, because you can't afford it. But yeah, a big part here is, if you have to pick anything, those age-based mutual funds will do you great if you don't have an idea about your approach. All right, so then on the opposite side of the spectrum, there are bonds, right? And most people have heard of bonds, but generally speaking, it's the definition of it from the investment world is, it's safe, right? Usually cannot lose money off of bonds. Generally speaking, it's like low risk, low return, and bonds. Basically, when you break it down, is you are lending an entity money, and you expect them to return that money to you, plus a little bit more, right? Just to fight off inflation. And usually there'll be corporate and government bonds, and the risk of these bonds will vary from government to corporation. Right, so the U.S. government has one of the safest bonds in the world, right? The U.S. Treasury bonds. So those are generally safe. But you pick any corporation, you're like, hey, how are your bonds? It depends, right? Usually credit agencies will rate the trustworthiness of those bonds from an A rating to a much lower grade. So, do research, figure out what bonds are safe, or, be safe and just buy a bunch of bonds, right? But basically, if these corporations or government run out of money and they can't pay your bonds, they basically default and they go into bankruptcy and you lose your money, right? The U.S. government has never done that. So for the most part, we can trust that they will pay off those bonds, right? So when you're young, bonds aren't great to have, right? Because you're in the wealth building mode. And since the returns are low, it doesn't help you a lot. But if you're closer to retirement, it's a great place to park your wealth, right? And it's a great place to keep your money stable, regardless if the economy is doing great or terrible. So here's a chart I pulled from Yahoo Finance, and just taking a look at bonds and stocks, right? So in the blue, you'll see a line representing bonds. And in the orange, it represents the S&P 500 index. For those of you who aren't aware, the S&P 500 is basically it's a measurement for how well the stock market is doing, right? So individual stocks, it's more nuanced than that, but that's a straightforward explanation of it. So if it goes down, generally speaking, it means the stock market is not doing so hot. If it's going up, it means it's doing great. Quick explanation on that. So this is a chart from 2003 to not today, like 2020. I know the stock market has mostly recovered at this point. But here you'll see in the purple box, in the neon pink purple box, I've highlighted a recession, right? 2008 recession. And in 2008, we had the housing crisis. And here you'll see stocks kind of took a plummet, right? They dipped below 0%. Not great. But you'll see that the bonds have stayed steady, right? The line did not move. It maybe moved a little bit down and moved back up. But bonds are generally a safe place to put your money, right? So imagine if you were in 08 and you were about to retire. If all your money was in stocks, you're not gonna be able to retire because you would have no money to retire. You have to keep working. But if your money was in bonds, you can afford to retire because you basically didn't lose anything, right? And obviously there are trade-offs, being that low returns, right? So you would have made 32% with bonds, but if you put it into the stock market, you would have made 221%, right? So there's trade-offs with it, but you don't want money in stocks, or you don't want a lot of money in stocks when you're close to retirement, just for the sake of the fluctuating value, because you will need to withdraw money from those accounts. All right. Are there any questions so far about individual stocks, bonds? If not, I'm going to move on to talk more about mutual funds and the role they play and how I utilize them. All right. Mutual funds. All right. Mutual funds are an investment tool that allows you to diversify your portfolio, right? So this is the idea that instead of buying 10 stocks, 20 stocks, if you buy one mutual fund, you can basically purchase or you can invest in basically hundreds of stocks, right? And this is a good thing because it lowers risk with the idea that it's unlikely that all companies will fail at the same time, right? All 100 companies will fail at the same time. That's unlikely. But, 1 to 2 companies, 10 companies, those have a higher rate of failing than hundreds of companies, right? So it's sort of like, think of it like a bundled investment deal in a sense. But there are fees associated with this just because you're doing less work and someone somewhere is bundling these investment vehicles together, right? So in here, it can include stocks, bonds, so on, right? Mutual fund is like a mixture of other investment vehicles. How often should we be monitoring the current situation, the Fed, low interest rates, etc.? If you're saving for retirement, you shouldn't, right? Because like in the long term, it doesn't matter. And I'm gonna show you a little bit of that in a bit. But if you are trying to save if you're investing for a house, if you're investing for anything else, the shorter term goals, I would say monitoring every quarter is not bad. But the one thing you want to avoid is staring at your phone all the time, seeing if the stock market goes up or down. I'm guilty of doing that, but try not to because it can sort of consume you and waste your time essentially, right? Because if you invest in the long term, there's no need to be nervous if you invest over a long period of time. This is why investing for retirement is relatively simple, right? You put the money in there and you forget it for the most part. And mutual funds, there are fees, right? Low and high. Obviously, pay low fees. Look for funds that pay low fees. The term for the fees that they charge is expense ratio. So these are and then there are other funds that are marked with the words no fees or no load fees. So, do research, make sure you're not paying a lot in terms of fees. My parents will retire sooner, over 59 and a half. Once retired, what are the options for continued investment? Should the 401k and IRAs be transferred to high yield savings and checkings account? I'm going to talk more about investing for parents in my next, or not investing for parents, for helping your parents retire in my next workshop. But just to give you a little sneak peek, essentially, I would say don't transfer, I wouldn't transfer all the money over to your checking account or savings account because it does impact you. Because if you take money out of the stock market, it means it cannot grow at all anymore, right? So when I say when you're close to retirement, you should have more bonds, I don't mean all bonds, right? You still need money to grow and fight off inflation. So you have a mixture of bonds and stocks, right? And bonds and mutual funds. So having that mixture and keeping it invested and only withdrawing what you need every year is ideal. The other thing is if you withdraw everything, you get taxed a lot. So you don't want to get taxed a lot. You want to get taxed as as minimal as possible. So to do that, you need to withdraw only what you need for that year. Right, can you explain no load fees? I'll be honest here. I can't because I only pick funds that have no load fees. So I avoid those fees completely. But it's I would say it's a quick Google search away for no load fees. So we can look into it together at the end of this workshop if there's still time. But I would say try to avoid fees altogether, right? Low fees are something that you do pay, I think, upon purchasing the mutual fund, but I could be incorrect. But since I pick funds that don't have those fees, you don't worry about them. All right, so try to avoid those fees. There's really a good reason to buy a fund with a fee, because there's so many out there that are very similar and have no fees, or have low fees, not no fees, have low fees. What's considered a low fee? For reference, my funds, their expense ratios are 0.04%, right? And for that's very low. And for reference in terms of like what high net worth individuals pay, most investment advisors do charge 1%. So compare 1% to 0.04%. You obviously, if you do your own research, you can avoid a lot of fees, right? So that's why I consider low. 0.10%, 0.1% is pretty low too, depending on what kind of mutual fund you want. So the type of mutual funds that I own that have these low fees are a specific niche of mutual funds, like it's a variant of a mutual fund, and it's called total market index funds. And every major brokerage will offer total market index funds, and generally they are considered a great tool for retirement. They're passively managed index funds, which means no one is actively trading these stocks or assets in these funds. For the most part, it's rarely touched, and they're really low fees because if no one's doing the work, there's not a lot of work being done, the fees are low, right? That's why it can be around 0.04%. But generally speaking, the total market index funds, just like how it sounds, it tracks the entire US stock market, right? So right now I own all 3,000 plus stocks in the US stock market, right? There's no stock that I do not own essentially. And this is, it's as much diversification you can get, because you don't own 100 stocks, you don't own 200 stocks, you own all of them, right? And the idea being is that it tracks how the entire US stock market is doing overall, right? And it is risky because essentially what I'm doing is I just bought 3,000 stocks, right? Stocks themselves are still risky. So it does fluctuate a lot, but it's fine because for this investment to fail, all 3,000 stocks in the stock market would have to drop and never recover. And has never happened in US history, but it has happened in other countries, right? So, take this with a grain of salt. But just to give some illustrations, you can take a look at Yahoo Finance again, and we took a look at these 3 total market index funds. So I have one from Vanguard, I have one from Charles Schwab, and I have one from Fidelity. One thing you notice right away is that the line is basically the same. The reason being is they all do the same thing. They all buy every single stock in the stock market. There's not a lot to think about here. And whatever they're made of, it's the same thing. Right, so this is the idea that the US stock market will always recover and grow over time, right? So for the past 60 years, it's recovered from countless recessions, it's recovered from countless financial crises. And so here are some quick 2 recessions you'll see right here. And if I did this last night, there would be 3 recessions because, we had the coronavirus recession, but there's a dot-com bubble in the early 2000s. In 08, we had the housing crisis. So here you'll see, the line dips down and then it goes back up. Dips down and goes back up. One thing you'll notice is it's always higher than what the previous amount was before it started dipping. Right, so total market index funds are risky. You'll see it does fluctuate quite a bit, but at the end of the day, it does go up over time. Right, so you have a large enough time period, and retirement is like the perfect time period for that because it's super long, right? And as long as you don't sell and you build your wealth over time, it will dip throughout the years, but it will recover and be higher generally. Why do you have funds with multiple brokerages? What's the benefit? Well, I have no multiple brokerages just because I started with one decided that, hey, I want to open up another one, test it out, see how their experience was like. And also because your 401k, you don't get to pick the brokerage that you start with. It's whichever one your firm is on, right? So, those are the two big reasons. I didn't get to pick it, and also because I wanted to try out the various brokerages, right? Someone asked about, Acorn before, right? I can't say Acorn is bad if I haven't tried it out, right? So I have tried it out, and I don't like it. So these, I try to try things out before I say they're negative or they don't make sense. But once I try them out, I can say I've used them, which I think helps everyone else in terms of you don't have to try it out yourself now. But I think overall for these total market index funds, as long as you do not sell during the recession, you should be fine. Right? So if you sell in the 08 and you sell at this very bottom point, that's not good for you. You want to be safe, keep your money invested, and eventually it'll go back up. Now we talked a lot about recessions, and for those of you who have, well, everyone's been through a recession now because we had the coronavirus recession. A lot of people lost their jobs too. So surviving a recession is very difficult, but it's doable, right? The one thing you want to do is prepare an emergency fund, right? And one of the most common reasons, one of the most common side effects of a recession is job loss, right? Unemployment skyrockets and you lose your job. If you lose your job, you still need to pay rent, you still need to eat, right? And what that means, you have to pull money from somewhere, and having an emergency fund will allow you to do that. If you don't have an emergency fund, you have to sell your investments. You have to sell something, right? Otherwise, you can't eat, and you can't pay rent, right? So if you have an emergency fund, you do not have to sell your investments. And recessions are the worst time to sell your investments because chances are they'll be at the lowest point that there ever will be. So if you sell your investments during that, you'll be losing a lot of money, right? So for people who don't have an emergency fund, one bad habit that they do is they tend to borrow money from the 401k, which they eventually have to pay back, which it's not ideal, right? You generally don't want to steal from your future self, and you want to have money saved away for different purposes, right? But the U.S. economy is cyclical, right? So it does mean it will get better over time. So the thing you'll notice in a recession, it's like a loop, right? It goes down and it goes back up, and it usually does not stay down, right? And if you have trouble watching your investments dip, try to find some emotional support, right? Or just don't look at your investments. Just avoid looking at them because then you'll want to sell because you're trying to want to get out. But don't do that, right? You want to be able to stomach watching your basically your money get cut in half, and have faith that it will recover if you wait long enough. Now we see unemployment rate 07 to today. Actually, the title is wrong. It's from 07 to today. You'll see that in the 08 recession, we went to 10% from 5%, and you'll see today we went from 4% to like above 15%. It's kind of insane. It might be unique to our specific circumstances, but unemployment does skyrocket when there's a recession because businesses fail. And when businesses fail, they can't pay salaries, right? So having an emergency fund for 3 to 6 months would allow you to find a new job when you lose your job, which is very important. No one's an exception to unemployment, right? Most people don't lose their job because they're incompetent. When it comes to a recession, they lose their job because the company cannot afford to pay you anymore. So just something to keep in mind. Now, if we look at the stock market again, just to re-enhance the point, bring it home. If we look at the S&P 500 again, right, a representation of the stock market. If we start in the 1960s and we end up in today, you'll see that this chart goes up, and you'll see all the recessions because there's a dip at all these points, right? So, and you'll see that it recovers from these recessions and it's higher than it was before, right? So when we're talking about retirement, you're actually going to end up on the upside for the most part, right? According to history. And if you sell during a recession, chances are you're going to regret it because you'll miss out on the growth upward afterward, right? So try to sell, try to keep your retirement investments, in the stock market for as long as you can, and you should be okay. There's another chart with another index called the Dow, which was used as a measurement for the stock market as well for the past 100 years. And here you'll see, same idea, right? It goes up over time. You see other recessions, it recovers. The one thing you'll notice in the red text is that the media or your best buddy is always going to tell you, hey, this is the top, this is as high as the stock market can go, or this is the bottom, right? It's as low as it can go. Because everyone's trying to figure out, hey, do I sell now? Do I sell later? The answer is you don't sell until you retire. If you retire during a recession, that's why you have an emergency fund, right? To sort of like outlast that period as much as you can. So this is the idea that it does recover over time. The media, your friends will tell you otherwise. Just look at the historical records. Chances are it will go up. And you want to stay in the market as long as you can, especially if it's a 40-year period or a 30-year period. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, my friend said leverage could be useful in a retirement account to gain more equity exposure early on when it matters most. What is the right level of leverage for someone who has the basics of budgeting and personal finance down? When you say leverage, are you saying you want to borrow money to invest that money? Or does your friend mean something else? Because if you're borrowing money to invest that money, I would strongly discourage it, because how are you going to pay the money back? You can't pull it out of your retirement account because there is a penalty for doing so. And if you bump into a recession and you have to pay the money back, you're not going to have enough money in the retirement account to do so either way. So leverage is tricky. I try not to play with leverage because you're taking a risk, and generally if you're in it for the long term, people aren't gonna say, banks aren't gonna say, hey, take this 40-year loan to buy some stocks, and in 40 years we'll collect. That's not gonna happen. So I wouldn't do that. I know some people use leverage to invest for their personal accounts. It's tricky. I'm not a big fan of it because I'm a long-term investor. I like to see things 30 years, 40 years down the line. And generally at that point, you don't depend on leverage to do so. All right. So do not predict the market. This is a big point that I want to hammer home, that people don't heed too much. If you think company X will do great in a month or in a year, that's trying to predict the market. When I say predict the market, it means, hey, I'm trying to buy this company and I think it will do well. That's trying to predict the market, right? Because you actually know if the company's going to do well. The best example I have for you is coronavirus. Who knew coronavirus would hit us? And who knew it would hit us this hard? Chances are, if you're an investor, you didn't know, right? And who knew, even though the coronavirus is hurting us right now, that the market would still recover and do quite well. We don't know where the stock market is going to go, and we cannot predict the stock market. And for people who try, it will only hurt you in the long run, right? So this is a big reason why I do long-term investing, and I don't try to time the market. I just, I get my paycheck, I put it in the stock market, and I call it a day. Right? I don't look, I don't see when I go in, I don't see anything, because I know that in a long enough period of time, I'll make money. Right? So, but if you have to sort of like scratch this itch of yours and invest, I wouldn't put more than 5% of your money into individual stocks, right? I think it's throwing money away, but who knows? Maybe you'll get lucky, right? It's hard to say. But for the most part, most people do not get lucky. And here's a case study to show that difficulty of trying to time the market. Right, so this is bet with a hedge fund and an index fund. Well, a hedge fund and a professional investor. Right, so those of you who are aware, Warren Buffett made a $1 million bet with protege partners, and they were the hedge fund. So these are the people. Hedge funds are basically firms that have access to the best financial tools and the best financial talent to basically pick investments and try to get the best return for their clients. Right, so they deal with high net worth individuals. They deal with people with a lot of money. Now, this firm had basically 5 chances to sort of build an investment that would make a lot of money. And at the end of the day, the one that made the most money was Fund C, and they made 87%. But the stock market, the S&P 500, made 125%. So there's almost a 40% difference between the best people with the best tools trying to pick stocks and pick individual investments versus just the stock market naturally growing by itself. Right, so this is like if you do a total market index fund, it will sort of follow this trajectory. Right, so this is why I invest in total market index funds, because it just makes sense. And I know there are specific hedge funds that do tend to do better than the stock market, but that's like it's a moot point because we don't have access to those firms because they're for the ultra rich basically. So if you come from a middle income, low income, your focus is building wealth, and the best way to do it is this same path. All right, now that we talked a whole bunch about investments, let's talk about, someone asked about how do I know how much money I need for retirement? And once you figure out how much money you need to sort of like retire when it comes to like costs, yearly expenses, you can sort of calculate how much money you need to have invested to retire. Right, so 1998, Trinity University came out with a study called the Trinity Study that I linked there, and you could read yourself when you have the opportunity. But basically, the idea is that the question they wanted to answer was, how much investments do I need over a 30-year period with no additional income? Or how much money do I need invested so that I can stop working and so I don't run out of money in 30 years? Right, and they took historical stock market data from 1926 to 1997 to calculate this number. All right, so if you withdraw 4% of your retirement funds every year, you could survive 30 years without working another day. All right, so if you have $1 million in your retirement account, you can live off of $40,000 for 30 years, basically. And at the end of 30 years, your retirement account will either hit 0 or it will be like slightly above 0 is what they concluded with their research. Now some quick math in terms of like how that works. 4%, if you work out the math backwards, you have a 25 multiplier. So once you figure out your yearly expenses in retirement, you just need to multiply that number by 25 and you'll have the number you need for retirement. Right, so whatever that number is, multiply by 25, and that's the amount you need invested in the stock market or in bonds or like in a combination of those assets to retire. All right, one last check for questions on that topic. But if the 4% withdrawal rule is confusing to anyone, feel free to reach out and ask about it. I will have my email here.
Alan, I just wanted to jump in quickly to let everyone know, since we've gone a little bit late. I wanted to make sure we've lost a couple of people. Just before we continue on, I have some links I want to share with everyone. Let them know. First of all, we'll share a recording of this event afterwards. And also I wanted to share a few links, in particular the registration link for the next session we're going to have about helping your parents retire, which is there in the chat, as well as Alan's blog, which has not only articles written by Alan, but also the ability to set up a chat with Alan to talk with him about some financial questions you might have. And he's not a financial planner, again, by trade, but he just has a wealth of knowledge about this stuff, and he's happy to chat more about it. So definitely check out his blog for that.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, this workshop is one of the, I would say one of the longest workshops that I had to have, just because there's just so much knowledge when it comes to retirement. It's hard to get in one shot. But we're at the end, so here it is. I would say if you take anything from this webinar, these are the 3 things to take away. Just buy and hold low-cost total market index funds. Don't sell during a recession, right? And invest the minimum for a 401k match, and then some into the IRA, right? So those are the 3 rules to take away from this. And one other thing I want to mention is I am building a tool, and it is available online to sort of like work through all this math if you are interested. And this is just a few screenshots for that tool. But it is available, and I can share it if you're interested. Just shoot me an email, and I will send you the link for it.
Oh, it's really cool, Alan.
Yeah, but the goal was to make it easy as possible to help you visualize your growth over time, right? Does it make sense to invest in more than one index fund and in more than one market index fund, or do they generally perform the same? Well, they all do the same thing. The total market index funds, they all perform the same because they all invest in the same thing. So having more than one doesn't really make sense too much.
Now, Alan, I think there's an interest in having a link for that. So either, if you want to share it in the chat, or if you want to give it to me to share in our follow-up email, either one could work.
Yeah, I could definitely share it up in the follow-up email. One thing is that it can be buggy. So if you see any bugs, report them to me, and I will fix them.
Still kind of in
otherwise,
beta mode. Yeah.
Pretty straightforward. Yeah, that's how I put it. It's not a public link. You can't find it on Google, but I can share it with the people in this webinar. All right, so as was mentioned before, I will have a financial literacy coaching sessions, which are basically free 30-minute sessions. You can talk to me about your financial situation. Many alumni have already used this, and you can ask questions. The goal is to teach you how to find the information that you need. I will share this link in the chat in a little bit. Basically, we want to help you schedule. You can schedule a session on the link and sort of just talk to me about where you are and where you might need assistance with. I can't give you investment advice, but I can tell you how to do more research. Right? The goal is to make sure that you can learn by yourself without having me always be there with you, trying to sort of guide you and do research for you.
Yeah, I mean, Alan sort of went from you basically had no knowledge of financial planning and literacy after graduating, and sort of got up to speed really fast. So you're sort of like the model for all of us, since so many of us don't have that much information about this. So really appreciate it.
Yeah. It's all about knowing where to look, right? Half the battle is knowing what to Google. I think is really what it comes down to. But yeah, so I have a blog that's already been shared. You can email me at alan@twomoonfund.com. It's also all over my blog. Or schedule a session with me. Happy to do that as well. There are previous videos on YouTube. And my next workshop's on 8/26 at 6 p.m. That one will be, I promise, will be shorter because there's less things to go over at that point. But basically, it's mainly for first-generation students and just helping your parents retire, right? Because that's a big concern for a lot of first-generation students.
Absolutely.
But here's some links. Basically, you click a link that I just shared. You can see this layout. Schedule some time here, and I will work through anything that you might be stuck on. We could do it together. And here is my blog. Check it out. If you want to subscribe, you can do so right here. All I want is your email address. I don't need your name. I don't need your birthday. It's super simple. But once you get that, every time I send out a blog post, you'll get an email for that. There's a YouTube channel where I post videos that I do outside of Baruch. And really, it's a resource for you if you want to learn about how to negotiate your compensation. If you want to learn about creating a budget workshop, these links are on the PowerPoint. And then finally, there is a playlist on Star Career Development Center for personal finance. Check it out. I think it will be very useful, especially if you haven't been to my previous workshops. And it'll have topics like credit cards and credit scores. And that's everything. That's everything. That was a long workshop. Maybe we would consider breaking this up into multiple webinars.
Perhaps, but lots of good information. I think that everybody got a lot out of this. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you to Alan for such a wonderful presentation. And definitely join us for our August 26th workshop. That's going to be super interesting and a really nice continuation of this conversation as well. Thank you so much to our alumni. Really appreciate everybody's engagement. Thanks for the kind words. We like hearing that. We definitely want to have some more workshops with Alan in the fall as well. So thanks, Alan. Thank you to everyone. And we'll send you a follow-up email with this recording within the next day or two. Alan, any final words?
I would say if you have any questions at all, you have my email. And also, if you have any topics that you would like to learn more about, feel free to share them with me. And I think we can work something out in terms of like presenting on them, right? Because there's a lot of financial literacy topics out there, and there's not a lot of people who want to do the research for them is a good way to put it, because there's so much information. And also, you know, everyone, stay safe. We live in a very fast-paced world. Stay safe and stay healthy. And I hope the best for your financial goals.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Everyone be well and have a great rest of your evening. Take care.